Tonight's file was built from 9 documented trucker incidents pulled from radio captures, vehicle logs, inspection paperwork, bank metadata, highway camera queries, and emergency call transcripts. These were not presented as fiction, and they were not collected for entertainment. They were collected because the same patterns kept returning in different states, different rigs, different years, and the same quiet gaps kept appearing where there should have been normal road. If you want more case files like these, subscribe to Black Pine Archives and turn on notifications. These 9 stories did not end cleanly, and the last one left a trail that did not belong to any map. Dylan Mercer had been running night freight long enough to treat the CB like weather. Most of it was noise. Most of it was bravado. The useful parts were small and practical, the kind of warnings that kept a driver from cresting into a stopped line or missing a closure by 10 miles. He had started the run in ordinary conditions. A dry trailer, a clean seal, a light load that handled well on corners, the kind of night where the hardest part was staying alert through the long, empty stretches between mill towns. His route cut through a corridor of timber leases and industrial spurs where service roads branched off into darkness and rejoined the main line without signage. He kept his CB on a familiar channel out of habit, not need. He did not talk much. He listened for the small things. A sudden warning about deer on a bend, a notice about a brake check, a driver complaining about black ice. That night, the channel sounded unusually clean. Less chatter, less overlapping, more dead air between transmissions, as if the band itself had widened. Dylan noticed it the way a driver noticed when the engine note changed by half a pitch. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet shift that made his shoulders tighten without permission. His phone showed weak signal, then none. The bars did not fade gradually. They dropped, returned, then dropped again, like the tower line was being crossed at precise points. He checked his dash clock against the ELD and found nothing wrong. But he felt the first hint of that old fatigue anxiety, the one that made a person doubt their own attention. He had been quiet for nearly an hour when the voice came through and addressed him as if the voice had been sitting in his passenger seat. "State your unit number." From a captured CB recording with embedded time code, Dylan did not answer. He did not key up out of stubbornness. He stayed silent because the voice did not use a handle, did not announce a channel, and did not carry the casual rhythm of a working driver. It sounded like a dispatcher reading from a form, clipped and patient, as if it had all night. The voice repeated the request. Same cadence, same spacing, same faint mechanical click at the end of the transmission, like a relay releasing. Dylan watched the road ahead and kept his hands steady on the wheel. He told himself it was a prank, a bored driver testing the channel, someone with a cheap voice changer and too much time. Then the voice added details Dylan had not put on air that night. It named his tractor unit number exactly. It named the commodity on his bill of lading in plain terms, the kind of description a stranger could only know if they had seen the paperwork or watched the trailer get loaded. Then it named his planned stop, a small underlit truck stop tucked behind a cluster of closed industrial lots, a place Dylan had chosen because it had decent coffee and enough light to sleep without feeling exposed. Dylan checked his mirrors and saw nothing unusual. The roadway behind him was empty except for the pale stretch of his own taillight reflection on wet asphalt. The tree line leaned close. The centerline paint looked worn and slightly misaligned, as if the road had been repainted in a hurry. The voice spoke again and gave a direction that made no sense for his route, as if it were trying to reroute him onto a connector that did not appear on his printed atlas. Dylan reached for the paper book anyway, the heavy one he kept under the passenger seat. He flipped to the county grid and found the area. The connector road the voice referenced was not there. He did not like that. It was one thing for a map app to miss a private haul road. It was another thing for a voice on the air to name a road that did not exist in print. Dylan opened a notes app and began typing. He wrote down the words he heard, the spacing, the odd click at the end. Halfway through, he realized his fingers were trembling enough to miss letters. He recorded a short voice memo because writing felt too slow. "I am not transmitting and it keeps addressing me. It knows my unit and my load." From Dylan's phone voice memo, he forced himself to stay procedural. He checked the mic. It was not stuck open. He checked the squelch. It was not misset. He turned the volume down and drove in silence for several minutes, watching for headlights. When he brought the volume back up, the voice returned immediately, as if it had been waiting for the sound to come back. Dylan made a choice he later described as automatic. He refused to respond. He refused to confirm he was listening. He kept the cab quiet except for the engine and the hiss of tires on damp pavement. That refusal seemed to change the tone of the event. The voice stopped asking. It began prompting, as if moving down a list of escalation steps. It described an upcoming curve before Dylan reached it. It described a reflective post on the shoulder before his headlights caught it. It did not sound excited. It sounded correct. Dylan felt the first true chill when the voice described the next rest area by name and then described a vehicle that would be waiting on the approach. He looked again, harder, pushing his eyes into the mirrors until his vision hurt. A dark vehicle appeared behind him shortly after, as if it had been introduced on cue. It kept a distance that was neither safe nor aggressive, like someone practicing restraint. Its headlights stayed low and steady, never flashing, never passing, never falling back. It simply remained there, a moving absence with a silhouette that refused clear identification in Dylan's mirrors. He tried to let it go. Highway overlaps happened. Vehicles traveled in the same direction, but the car matched his speed too precisely. When Dylan adjusted by a few miles per hour, the car adjusted with him without lag. He hit his hazard lights briefly to suggest caution. The car did not respond. It did not back off. It did not pass. It stayed fixed. Dylan changed lanes where the road widened briefly near a turnoff. The car changed with him. The movement felt synchronized, not reactive, like both vehicles were following the same script. He considered pulling off immediately, but the voice had already named the underlit stop he had planned. Dylan could not shake the feeling that if he went where the voice wanted, the night would narrow. He chose a different place. A lit rest area with more visibility, more human presence, more cameras in theory. The moment he committed to that exit, the voice returned with a different cadence, slightly faster, as if the script had advanced. Dylan did not key up. He did not breathe loudly. He let the words pass through the cab like cold air from a cracked window. He pulled into the rest area and parked near a cluster of other rigs, where human presence would be inconvenient for anyone trying to isolate him. He did not step out immediately. He sat with his seatbelt still clicked and his eyes fixed on the rear view mirror. The dark vehicle rolled through the lot slowly, its headlights washing across trailer doors like a searchlight. It did not stop. It did not park. It made one pass, then a second, then left the lot without accelerating. Dylan waited until it was gone, then looked around at the other trucks, as if expecting them to acknowledge what had just happened. No one moved. No one stared. The lot continued in the ordinary way of lots, engines ticking, air compressors cycling, a distant door slam, a dog barking once and going quiet. Dylan called emergency services while he still had signal and reported an unknown vehicle shadowing him without plates he could confirm, followed by dark vehicle. From a 911 call summary, he did not tell the dispatcher about the voice knowing his unit number. Not yet. He framed it as a safety concern because that was how a driver kept their report from being dismissed. Even so, the call ended without a unit dispatched, the kind of outcome that happened when a report lived in the gap between suspicious and actionable. Dillon tried the CB again, not to talk, but to listen for any normal traffic that could anchor the night. A few voices returned, distant and overlapping, but the channel still felt too clean, too spaced, too controlled. He drove out of the rest area and stayed on the main line, refusing any connector roads that were not clearly labeled. The dark vehicle did not reappear. That should have brought relief. Instead, it made the whole sequence feel less like coincidence and more like a completed task. At the end of the run, Dillon did what many drivers did when they did not want to sound irrational. He gathered evidence. He saved his voice memo. He copied the time window. He wrote down the location where the voice first broke through. Then he contacted a local repeater operator known in the region for maintaining logs and fixing dead spots. Dillon requested a records pull for the relevant window, hoping to prove that someone had keyed up on his channel and possibly identify a handle. The response did not match his expectation. Handle not registered. From a repeater activity log excerpt, it was not just that Dillon's own handle was absent. The log showed an identifier format Dillon did not recognize, a string that did not align with regional practice, and the transmissions from the unknown voice did not register like ordinary local traffic. They appeared in the log as if they had been injected, clean and strong, without the usual bleed or drift. The technical summary included a note about the signal's strength profile. It had arrived without the normal rise and fall that came from a moving transmitter. Dillon's testimony became the first rung of the ladder. The captured audio and the repeater log became the second. The emergency call summary became the third. A pattern began to form in the file that did not rely on belief. It relied on traces. Weeks later, Dillon told another driver a version of the story that excluded the worst details. He described the shadow car and the strange, quiet channel. He described the voice using the word unit, the way enforcement used it, the way companies used it, the way systems used it. He did not describe how the voice sounded like it was reading him from a list. The worst part was how certain it sounded, like it already knew the next line. From Dillon's follow-up statement, after that night, Dillon stopped using the CB for weeks. When he returned, he stayed on scan mode more than talk. He kept a second phone in the cab with a dedicated recorder app, ready to capture anything that did not belong. He also began avoiding a specific cluster of exits where his signal had dropped sharply that night. He did not mark the reason on paper. He simply treated it as a new hazard, like black ice or falling rock. Archival transition. In these files, the voice rarely asked questions. It issued prompts. It confirmed details. And when the driver refused, the road often answered on the voice's behalf. Raul Ibarra had been through enough legitimate inspections to recognize the rhythm of a real way station. There was a certain clutter to it, a mess of cones that never matched, scuffed paint where bumpers kissed the line, oil stains baked into the pavement, posted hours that were ignored in practice, a sense that the place had been used, complained about, and repaired just enough to keep functioning. The station that flagged him down on the night of early winter did not look used. It looked assembled. Raul was hauling dry freight on a corridor that skimmed a state line and cut through wide, dark stretches of timberland and industrial frontage. The traffic thinned after midnight until he could count the headlights on one hand. He liked those hours. Less chaos, fewer surprises. The kind of driving where a person could watch the road surface and trust their instincts. He saw the first warning at a distance, bright and clean on the shoulder. The message board was not permanent metal on posts. It was portable, the type set up for special operations. The instruction was plain: a stop ahead. Prepare to pull in." Raul complied because non-compliance had consequences that followed a driver through audits and renewals. He signaled early, eased off the throttle, and felt the truck settle as the lane narrowed. Clean plastic barriers guided him in, their surfaces too smooth, too unmarked. No scrape lines from mirrors, no scuffs from tires. No grit ground into the reflectors. The lights over the lane were bright and fixed, harsh against the surrounding darkness, like a work site that had not yet been breathed on by use. The booth window was lit, but the booth itself read wrong even before Raul reached it. He expected shadows, a silhouette, the faint movement of paperwork, the human clutter of an overnight officer. Instead, he saw an empty rectangle of light. No face, no motion, no stacks, no coffee cup, no posted badge number or station name in the window. Raul rolled forward until his bumper aligned with the painted stop marker and waited for instructions that did not come. His dash camera kept recording, catching the hiss of his air brakes and the low, steady tick of the engine cooling under load. He listened for the small sounds that usually confirmed a human presence: a door latch, a chair scrape, the rattle of a radio. Nothing answered. Minutes passed, long enough for Raul's professional patience to thin into unease. The booth light remained on. The lane lights remained on. The station remained empty. He checked his cab clock, then the ELD time. They did not match by much, but the difference bothered him because it had not been there earlier. He checked his phone and found no signal, not even a weak bar. Raul waited a little longer, then eased forward as if he might find an officer standing on the far side, waving him through. Instead, he found a ticket printer mounted on a post at the edge of the lane, positioned at window height for a driver's seat. The printer fed paper without being touched. It made a small mechanical sound, a soft whine, and then the thermal strip emerged into the cold air like a receipt from a machine that had already decided the transaction. The printer did not display a prompt. It did not blink. It simply produced. Raul reached out through the cracked window and took the ticket between two fingers. The paper was warm, freshly printed, the ink still glossy. The strip held a block of numbers and letters in a format Raul did not recognize. It listed a code that looked official at first glance, but the shape of it was wrong, as if someone had copied the idea of compliance without understanding the real language. It also listed a timestamp Raul could not reconcile with his cab clock. There was no officer number, no station identifier, no agency header, only the code and the instruction to retain it for verification. Raul stared at the booth again. The window remained lit. The booth remained empty. He did what drivers did when logic failed. He made a record. He photographed the ticket, the post, the lane, the booth. He spoke a short note into his phone for context, trying to keep his tone steady. There is no one here. The booth is lit and empty, and the ticket printed by itself. From Raul's phone voice memo, he pulled forward slowly out of the lane and rejoined the highway with a tightness in his chest that felt disproportionate to a simple inspection anomaly. In his mirrors, the station lights stayed bright for several seconds, fixed and hard against the dark, then dipped out of view as the road curved away. The next day, Raul handled it like a compliance issue, because that was the only language available. He contacted the Department of Transportation Help Desk and supplied the location, the nearest mile marker, and the corridor name. He emailed the photos and attached the code. The response returned with bureaucratic certainty that did not match what Raul had driven through. Station not authorized. From a Department of Transportation response, the message included a list of authorized inspection points in that region. The station Raul described was not on the list. The help desk suggested he might have misread the location or encountered a temporary construction checkpoint operated by another agency. Raul checked his photos again. There was no construction signage, no crew, no equipment, only that empty booth and the printer. The second confirmation came when Raul attempted to verify the ticket code through a compliance portal. The system rejected it immediately. Ticket code invalid. From a compliance verification note, those two pieces of documentation, the agency response and the portal rejection, should have ended the story as a strange but harmless glitch. Instead, they turned the event into something that felt deliberate. An unauthorized station had forced him to stop. It had generated a physical artifact. It had left him holding proof of a process that officially did not exist. Raul tried to make sense of it by returning to the corridor the following night, with his dash camera ready and a plan to approach from the same direction. He told himself that if he could capture the entrance clearly, he could at least prove the structure had been there. The road did not cooperate. The approach behaved like a loop. The first hint was subtle. A familiar curve arrived sooner than it should have. A bent reflector post appeared at the shoulder, angled slightly toward the ditch as if it had been clipped. Raul remembered it because it looked like a crooked finger in his headlights. He passed it and kept going. Then, minutes later, he saw it again. Same bend, same reflector post, same shallow pothole flashing under his right headlight in the exact same shape as if the pavement had been stamped. His ELD suggested he was moving forward. His gut insisted he was circling inside a short segment of road that refused to let him reach the station. Raul narrated into his phone again, not for drama, but for grounding. I am seeing the same marker again. This is the same bend. I have not turned around. From Raul's second voice memo, when he finally reached what should have been the entrance, the portable sign was not there. The lane barriers were not there. The clean lights were not there. The shoulder was empty, dark, and wet. Only trees and the dull striping of the road. He drove past, then circled back, forcing himself to take the next exit and approach again from farther out. The loop repeated the same way, as if the road itself had developed a short memory and kept replaying a small section. Approach loop times 2. From dash camera review notes on his second pass through the repeating stretch, Raul noticed something that made him slow to a crawl. Along the guardrail near the ditch, the metal bore parallel scratches at a steady height. They did not look like vehicle impact. They looked like something had been dragged along deliberately, like a tool carried by someone walking, keeping contact with the rail as a guide. Raul stopped on the shoulder and stepped out. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs. The forest smelled wet and old, the kind of scent that made a person feel watched even when no eyes were visible. He ran his glove along the scratches and felt sharp new edges. Then he heard it. Not a voice, not an engine. A brief, thin mechanical sound from somewhere ahead, the whine of a printer motor running without human hands. Raul got back into his truck and drove forward fast enough to feel the trailer tug. When he reached the spot where the station had been, the booth was gone. Not dark, not abandoned. Gone. The shoulder held no fresh holes where posts had been set. The lane paint was not there. The bright lights were absent. There was a single post remaining near the ditch line, and Raul recognized it because it matched the height of the printer mount in his photos. The mount itself was empty. The bolts were still there, metal bright and new, as if the hardware had been installed recently and removed cleanly. Raul took more photos. He filmed the empty shoulder. He filmed the clean bolts. The station had not been collecting money. It had not even been collecting fines. Raul never received a penalty tied to the code, which should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like a message. The station had trained him to stop when instructed, even when the place issuing the instruction did not exist. He kept the ticket folded into a clear sleeve in his logbook. The thermal paper faded over time, but the code remained readable long enough to be photocopied and attached to an internal file, a physical artifact that outlived the station itself. Raoul stopped taking that corridor on nights when traffic thinned and the radio went quiet. He did not explain why to dispatch. He simply requested alternate routing and accepted the lost time as a cost of staying real. Archival transition. In the next case, the service did not issue paper. It issued sound at a fixed interval, like a metronome inside sealed steel. Kieran Walsh hauled sealed freight that was not his business to understand. He drove the routes he was assigned, verified the seal number, logged it, and delivered without asking what lay behind the doors. It was the kind of work that rewarded routine and punished curiosity. The trailer was closed. The paperwork was correct. The rest was not his problem. That winter run began like any other. The air was cold enough to sharpen every sound in the cab. The highway was wet and black, reflecting his marker lights in long, broken lines. His trailer felt stable behind him. No sway, no chatter through the fifth wheel, no unusual vibration in the steering. The load pulled like dead weight, consistent and quiet. He had signed for it at a crossdock just after dusk. The yard was bright with sodium lamps, the kind that made everything look drained and pale. A clerk had handed him the bill and the seal number, and Kieran had done what he always did. He walked to the back, put his gloved fingers on the cold plastic, and read the digits twice to make sure he had not swapped them in his head. He photographed the seal for his own records. He did not do that every time, but that night the number had looked too clean, too crisp, as if it had been printed moments earlier. He told himself he was being thorough. He told himself it meant nothing. The route took him through a stretch of grades where drivers learned patience. A long downgrade, steady and smooth, the kind that punished anyone who tried to ride the brakes. Kieran shifted down and let the engine do the work. He watched his speed the way a person watched a heartbeat, steadying it, keeping it in bounds. The load felt normal until he began managing the descent with care instead of urgency. That was when the first impact sounded from the trailer. It was not a rattle, it was not shifting cargo. It was a single heavy thump that landed like a fist against metal. The sound came through the frame, up into the cab, a dull concussion that did not travel the way ordinary freight noise traveled. It felt centered, deliberate, placed. Kieran held his line and let his hands stay calm on the wheel. His first thought was mechanical, a loose pallet, a strap snapped, something settling after a bump. Then the second impact came and the timing made his stomach tighten. He had not hit a pothole. The pavement was smooth. There was no external reason for the sound to repeat. Still, it returned in the same way, the same strength, like a metronome he could feel in his ribs. He slowed slightly, not out of fear, but to reduce sway and listen. As his speed decreased, the impact returned again with full force, as if whatever caused it preferred him to go slow. Kieran recorded on his phone because the sound did not match any freight behavior he had known. The clip captured the engine note, the hiss of tires on wet road, and then the impact, clean and centered like a cue. I am getting a hard hit from inside the trailer. It is not shifting freight. It is a single thump on a fixed interval. From Kieran's phone voice memo, the impacts continued. They did not accelerate. They did not drift. They did not get lost in the noise of the road. They arrived with the steady certainty of a clock that did not care about terrain or weather. Later review would reduce the pattern to a line item, the kind of language people used when they wanted to sound objective about something that made no sense. Impact every 120 seconds. From a post-event audio analysis note, Kieran took the next turnout, a wide gravel shoulder cut into the trees where truckers sometimes stopped to check brakes. He eased off the road, set the brakes, and sat for a moment with his hands still on the wheel. He listened for the normal cooling sounds, the tick of hot metal. He listened for any change. Another impact struck from the trailer, even while he was stopped. He climbed out with a flashlight and walked the length of the trailer. The air outside had that winter smell of wet pine and road salt, sharp enough to sting. He checked the latches, he checked the hinges, he checked the edges of the doors for pry marks or tampering. Nothing. At the seal, he pressed his thumb against the plastic and felt its hard ridges. It did not flex. It did not show stress whitening. It was untouched. Seal intact. From an incident report, the next impact landed while he was standing with his light on the seal, and the sound was worse out there. The metal skin of the trailer carried it like a drum. It struck from inside, not from beneath, and it struck with enough force that Kieran felt it in his shoes through the gravel. He backed away and swept his light along the trailer sides, half expecting to see a bulge or a dent form and relax. The aluminum panels remained flat. The rivet lines remained straight. Nothing moved. The impacts continued at the same interval, so consistent that Kieran's breathing began to sync with it without permission. Inhale, wait, thump. Inhale, wait, thump. The pattern tried to teach his body a rhythm. He returned to the cab and called dispatch. He reported a repeating internal impact that did not match load shift and did not stop when parked. He expected the usual response. Pull over, call roadside, document damage. They would call the shipper. They would argue about claims. The response returned faster than he expected and did not sound like anyone was worried about freight damage. Do not open. From a dispatch log entry, Kieran stared at the words on his screen after the call ended, replaying them in his head. The instruction was not framed as advice. It was framed like a rule. He had not asked about opening the trailer. He had not suggested breaking the seal. Dispatch had gone there first, as if they knew what a driver's instinct would be when something hit from inside a sealed box. Kieran did not open it. He did not break a seal that had become, strangely, the only boundary he trusted. He pulled back onto the highway and continued the run, with his eyes shifting between mirrors and road, as if the threat might appear outside as well. The impacts followed him like a clock. When he accelerated on flat stretches, the impacts softened, as if the thing inside did not like being pinned by speed and vibration. When he slowed for curves, they returned with full force, as if the trailer had been listening for the change in tempo. He tried to test it like a mechanic. He held speed steady for long minutes. The impacts remained steady. He changed speed in small increments. The impacts did not change interval, but they changed force, growing harder when he eased down and lighter when he pushed forward. It felt like conditioning. Slow down and it would announce itself. Speed up and it would retreat. At a fuel stop, Kieran parked under bright canopy lights near other rigs. He did not want to be alone with it in darkness. He did not mention the impacts to other drivers because he could already hear how it would sound out loud, like fatigue, like nerves, like a story told too late at night. He kept the engine running while he fueled. He listened. The impacts never came while he stood in the open under the lights. The moment he pulled away into a darker stretch, the next thump arrived on schedule, as if the thing had only been waiting for privacy again. By the time he reached the receiver yard in the early hours, he was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with miles. The gate guard waved him through. A yard supervisor met him with a handheld scanner and walked the seal number twice, eyes on the screen. Kieran watched the supervisor's face tighten at the second scan, then relax into practiced neutrality. The supervisor did not ask questions. He did not look Kieran in the eye. He simply motioned for Kieran to back into a door. Kieran set the brakes and stepped out. Another impact struck, loud enough to make the supervisor's head tilt slightly, as if he had heard it too, even if he refused to acknowledge it. The supervisor continued walking, as if the sound was part of the yard, Authorized staff opened the doors after confirming paperwork. Kieran was instructed to remain in his cab. That was normal policy for sealed loads. He could not see inside. He could only hear the distant sound of forklifts and the beep of reverse alarms somewhere deeper in the warehouse. He listened for the impacts. They stopped. Not gradually, not fading. They stopped the moment the trailer doors opened, as if whatever had been striking from within did not want that sound heard by anyone who was not part of the handoff. The receiver's inspection report later showed no anomalies. The seal number matched the bill. The delivery was recorded as normal. Kieran was directed to leave the yard. As he rolled through the gate and back onto public road, he realized his hands were still shaking on the wheel. He checked his phone recording again, needing proof that it had happened at all. The artifacts were what remained of that night. A photo of the seal taken under flashlight glare. A recording of impacts spaced with unnatural precision. A dispatch instruction that arrived too quickly and too specifically. And the uncomfortable fact that the impacts ended the moment the transaction moved out of his control, as if the thing inside had only needed him to carry it, and only needed the sound to shape his driving until it reached the right door. Archival transition. The next file contained no sound at all. It contained paper that should have expired and a gap in electronic logging that did not match the human memory of driving. Lena Park had learned that fatigue made the road lie. Distances stretched. Exit numbers blurred into each other. The mind filled in gaps with confidence and called it memory. That was why she trusted her electronic logging device more than her own sense of time. The ELD did not get sleepy. The ELD did not hallucinate a sign where none existed. That night she had been running a thin corridor of highway that cut through timber and scrub, a route that felt unfinished even when it was maintained. The sky carried low cloud, and the road reflected it in long, dark panels, like driving across wet slate. Lena had been legal on hours, but legal did not mean sharp. Her eyes burned the way they always did when the caffeine stopped working and the body began asking for something real. She had planned her stop. A familiar chain location with bright lights and predictable food. She had a printed trip sheet and a mental timeline built around it. She could point at the exact mile range where she expected to rest. Then she saw a sign she did not recognize. It rose from the shoulder ahead in washed-out neon, the kind of old illumination that hummed rather than glowed. The letters were uneven, as if they had been repaired more than once. It promised fuel, hot food, vacancies, the classic list in a style that felt older than the highway itself. The name on it did not match any brand Lena knew. It looked like a place that had survived 1,000 winters by refusing to update. She told herself she had simply missed it before. She told herself the route had changed. She told herself she was too tired to remember every roadside business on Earth. The exit ramp was shallow and narrow, not the modern broad curve designed for full rigs. Her trailer followed reluctantly. Her tires crossed onto asphalt that felt different under the cab, rougher, older, patched in strange rectangular scars like it had been repaired with whatever was available. The lot ahead was lit, but not brightly. It was a dim yellow wash that made everything look like a photograph left too long in sunlight. There were trucks parked along the far line, but the shapes did not look quite right. The silhouettes were squared and tall. Some had profiles Lena associated with older fleets, older cabs. It was subtle enough that she might have dismissed it if she had not already been uneasy. She parked, set her brakes, and sat for a moment, listening to her engine settle. The air outside smelled like wet pine and diesel, but beneath it was another layer, stale and sweet, like old fryer grease trapped in carpet for years. She went inside because the lights were on, and her body needed to believe in a break. The interior hit her with warmth and heavy smell. Fried food, coffee that had been sitting too long, old carpet that held dampness. The lighting was soft, and low, the kind that made corners look deeper than they should. A row of booths ran along one wall. The vinyl was cracked, shiny with age, and some of the seats were patched with duct tape that had yellowed. A radio played somewhere behind the counter, but the audio sounded thin and distant, as if traveling through a speaker designed decades earlier. Lena could not make out the song clearly, only the cadence, the sense that it belonged to another era. She ordered coffee because she always ordered coffee. It was habit, a marker that told her she was still functioning. The cup was thick foam, not the modern insulated kind. The lid snapped on with a cheap plastic click. She swallowed a mouthful and tasted burned bitterness that coated her tongue. The cashier did not make small talk. The cashier did not ask where she was headed. There was no familiar friendliness, no scripted upsell, only a quiet efficiency that felt like a person following a routine written down long ago. The receipt printed on thin thermal paper that felt too flimsy in her hand. The logo at the top used sharp angles and an outdated typeface that made Lena think of old phone books and motel signage from roadside photographs. The ink was slightly faded already, as if the machine printed in a weak pulse. She stared at the line items because she always checked totals. Coffee. A packaged sandwich she did not remember picking up but found in her bag later. Tax. Then she saw the date. The numbers were clear enough to read. The year was not the current year. It was not even close. Lena's first instinct was mechanical, a misprogrammed register, a stuck internal clock, a business that never updated its systems. Her second instinct was more human and more dangerous, that she had not just stepped into an outdated place, but into an outdated time. I kept looking at the receipt because the year was wrong, and my brain refused to accept it. From Lena's written statement, she paid, took her coffee, and went back out to her truck. She planned to sleep for a short block, just enough to reset. She set an alarm on her phone, confirmed it twice, then closed her eyes. When she woke, the sky had lightened into that gray-blue before true dawn. Her first sensation was wrongness. Not fear, not panic, but the quiet certainty that the world had shifted while she slept. She stepped down from her cab and looked across the lot. It was empty in a way that did not match her memory. Not just fewer rigs, empty. No parked trucks, no idling engines, no distant voices. The air was cold and flat. She turned toward where the building should have been. There was nothing, no storefront, no pumps, no sign, no trash cans, no light spill on pavement. Only highway shoulder, a shallow ditch, and trees beyond it. The ground where the entrance had been was unbroken gravel and grass, as if no one had turned off there in years. The scene did not look abandoned. It looked like it had never been built. Lena walked the shoulder in a widening circle, searching for any physical clue. Broken asphalt, a leftover post, a scar in the ground. There was nothing but road and wet earth. Back in the cab, she checked the ELD because it was the one thing that should not lie. The display showed a gap that was too neat to be human. ELD gap, 47 minutes. From an electronic logging summary, it was not flagged as a malfunction. It was not labeled as a power loss. It was simply missing, as if someone had taken a clean slice of time out of her shift and stitched the ends back together. Her phone alarm history showed an alarm that should have rung. There was no record of it going off, no missed notification. The battery level was normal. The time on her phone did not match the time on the cab clock by a small amount that should not have happened in a single stop. Lena drove until she hit reliable cell coverage and pulled into the next known truck stop, the one she had planned to use all along. Under bright modern lighting, she called her bank and asked them to verify the charge. The charge existed, but the business details did not anchor to anything real. Merchant YD unassigned. From a bank verification note, the bank could confirm money moved, but could not confirm who it moved to, only a string of metadata that led nowhere. Lena did what tired professionals do when something does not fit. She tried to prove herself wrong with paperwork. She later contacted the county records office for the coordinates where the stop had appeared. A clerk checked permits and parcel history. The response came back blunt and final. No business at coordinates. From a county verification response. No license. No past records. No mention of a truck stop being built there and later demolished. No history of fuel tanks, no environmental reports, nothing. The land was simply land. Lena's only physical proof was the receipt. She kept it in a clear sleeve like evidence because that was what it had become. Thermal paper was not meant to last, but the ink held long enough to be scanned. Even as it faded, the impossible date remained visible, a small anchor that refused to disappear as completely as the building had. In the weeks after, Lena tried to return, not once, but multiple times. In daylight, with a full tank, with another driver behind her as a witness. She approached from both directions. She watched mile markers. She watched the shoulder. She watched for any hint of an exit ramp. There was nothing. The highway shoulder there was clean, as if no tires had ever turned off. Only trees, ditch, and a silence that felt curated, the kind of quiet that made a driver stop scanning for traffic and start scanning for patterns. Later, in informal talk among drivers who trusted each other, Lena noticed a similarity in other stories. A place appeared when the driver was exhausted. It offered heat and coffee and a moment of relief. It printed paper, then daylight canceled it, leaving only an electronic logging gap too precise to be error. 47 minutes, 1 hour, 31 seconds. Always a missing slice of time, shaped like a decision someone else had made. Lena stopped taking unknown exits at night. She stopped trusting lone signs. She began photographing every receipt, every log screen, every pump display, building her own archive because the official systems were not built to recognize roads that decided to erase themselves. And she kept the impossible receipt, not because it explained anything, but because it proved the experience had weight. In a world where a place could appear, take your time, and vanish by morning, paper became a kind of footprint. Archival transition. In the next file, the road did not erase time in one clean gap. It returned on schedule instead. The hour became the address, and the sound arrived as if it had been booked in advance. Elliot Brandt treated sleep like a safety procedure. He chose lots with lighting that stayed on all night. He backed in so his trailer doors faced a camera or a wall. He avoided corners where people gathered to drift, smoke, argue, and watch. He did not believe in signs, and he did not collect stories. He collected habits that kept him alive. That was why the first knock irritated him more than it scared him. It happened in early spring on a wide rest area outside a mid-sized highway junction, the kind built to hold a long row of rigs and a second row of cars. Elliot had finished his log, pulled his curtains, and settled into the shallow darkness of the sleeper. The air in the cab smelled faintly of fabric, coffee, and the vinyl heat of a dashboard that had been warmed all day. At what his dash clock later showed as 3:17 in the morning, 3 knocks landed against the sleeper wall. They were not frantic. They were not loud. They were calm, evenly spaced, as if delivered by someone who expected the driver to wake and understand. Elliot sat up fast enough to strain his neck. He listened for the follow-up noise that always came after a real knock. Boots shifting on gravel, the creak of a step, a cough, a voice, a hand sliding on metal. There was nothing. He checked the locks without turning on the dome light. He looked through the gap in the curtain and watched his side mirror. The lot remained still, lit in harsh white patches with shadows pooled beneath bumpers like thick oil. No figure moved between trucks. No headlights passed close, no door opened. He told himself it was someone at the wrong rig, embarrassed into silence. He told himself it was a falling branch, a piece of debris kicked by wind. He told himself the world contained enough ordinary explanations that he did not need any other kind. He slept again, but lighter. The second night proved it was not a one-off. It happened a state away, in a private truck stop lot behind a diner that stayed open all night. Elliot had chosen it because there was security and cameras, because there were other rigs, because there was a predictable pattern of human movement. He had eaten, logged off, and climbed back into the sleeper with a sense of routine returning. At 3:17, the knocks arrived again. 3. Even spacing, then nothing. He slid out of the bunk and checked the cab the way he checked it every morning, as if the act itself could force the noise into a rational category. He saw no shadow at the curtains. He heard no footfalls. He opened his driver door a crack and listened to the air of the lot. It smelled of diesel and fryer grease, and it carried the low hum of highway in the distance. No one stood there. He closed the door, locked it, and sat with his hands on his knees until his pulse slowed enough to call it sleep again. By the third night, Elliot stopped pretending it was coincidence. He began preparing like a man gathering evidence against something that did not want to be seen. He parked at a different kind of place entirely, a busy chain lot with floodlights and a camera mast on each corner. He positioned his phone on the bunk with the camera aimed toward the driver door and the audio set to record. He did not expect a video to show a hand at the window. He only wanted sound with a timestamp that could not be argued into imagination. At 3:17, the 3 knocks arrived on schedule. The recording captured them cleanly, with the faint ambient hum of the cab, and then the 3 impacts like punctuation marks, placed by a steady hand. Knocks at 3:17 recorded. From an audio capture label, Elliot sat up and watched the curtain gap, with a focus that bordered on anger. He waited for the moment someone would step back, walk away, reveal themselves as a prank or a drifter or a security guard doing a round. The lot outside remained unchanged. In the morning, he walked the recording to the security desk like a man filing a complaint against a sound. The supervisor reviewed the camera feed for the minute before and after the timestamp. The screen showed Elliot's rig, still and dark, parked in a line of other vehicles. No person approached the driver door. No shadow crossed the side panel. No movement occurred close enough to be the source. No one on CCTV. From a lot security note, Elliot did not feel relief when the camera confirmed absence. Relief required an explanation. This only confirmed that the knocks did not behave like human knocks. He started writing it down because memory began to feel slippery around the edges, as if sleep and stress were sanding details off his days. The log became a ledger rather than a diary, a place where he could trap facts before they shifted. 3 nights, same time. From Elliot's personal log, by the 4th night, he changed his routine deliberately. He stayed awake later, keeping his mind sharp with cold water and light. He set an alarm for 10 minutes before 3:17. He did not want to wake to knocks again. He wanted to meet them awake, to hear them arrive. The alarm went off. The cab was quiet. Elliot lay still, eyes open, listening to the layered sounds of a lot at night. Distant idling, occasional air brake cough, a truck easing into a slot, the faint buzz of lights. 3:17 arrived. The knocks came from below, not from the door, not from the sleeper wall, from the frame transmitted through steel and mattress and bone, as if someone had struck the truck's skeleton with knuckles made of metal. 3 impacts evenly spaced. A pause, then silence that felt deliberate. Elliot did not climb down. He did not step onto the lot. He did not look under the truck with a flashlight the way he would have done for a loose strap or a leaking line. Something in him understood that the point was not to cause damage. The point was to provoke a response. He stayed in the cab and listened until his breathing stopped fighting the air. In the morning, he inspected the truck the way a mechanic would. He checked the frame rails for fresh marks. He checked the steps. He checked the side panels. He checked the fifth wheel and the glad hands. He found nothing that suggested contact. That absence was its own kind of mark. The pattern continued across more lots, more runs, more miles. Elliot began tracking not just the knocks, but everything around them. Weather, location, whether the lot had security, whether the highway had been heavy or empty, whether he had used the CB that night. A detail emerged in later analysis when he pulled his ELD event history for the nights in question. 1 minute before 3:17 on each night, there was a brief power fluctuation. Not enough to trigger a system error, just a tiny dip and return, like something had pinged the truck's electronics and moved on. Elliot could not prove what that meant, but he began treating 3:17 as a boundary. He started planning his brakes so he would be rolling through that minute instead of lying still. He began choosing rest areas where other drivers were awake, where engines were turning over, where the night had witnesses. The knocks did not injure him. They did not break in. They did not steal freight. They did something worse. They demonstrated access without entry. They proved that steel walls and locked doors were not the same as control. They showed Elliot that whatever traveled these corridors did not need to touch the handle to reach him. It only needed to know when he would be still enough to listen. 1 minute before it happens, the cab feels like it holds its breath. From Elliot's later statement, archival transition. In the 6th file, the service did not knock at all. It moved the truck while the driver slept, and the route it drew crossed land where no road should have existed. Andre Russo ran a newer tractor that companies liked because it behaved. Its telematics were stable, its diagnostics were predictable. The system caught minor faults early, logged everything without drama, and fed compliance with the clean confidence of modern data. Andre trusted that confidence because it had saved him more than once. A bad sensor threw obvious errors. A dropped satellite signal left jagged gaps. A real glitch looked messy. The morning that broke that trust started ordinary. Andre woke in the sleeper to pale light and cold air that smelled like wet pavement. He rolled out of the bunk, checked his phone, and reached for the ELD display out of habit. The screen showed his status still in sleeper berth, exactly as he had set it. The timestamp looked right. The hours looked normal. Then he noticed the drive line. A segment of driving had been logged during the period he had been asleep. It was not a 1-minute bump from yard movement. It was not a brief roll from forgetting to set the brake. It was a full segment long enough to matter, drawn on the ELD map as a single clean stroke. It was almost beautiful. Drive during sleeper. From an ELD export note, Andre scrolled through the event details the way a mechanic read a scan tool. Start time, end time, average speed, no hard braking events, no rapid acceleration flags, no lane deviation warnings from the safety module, no engine fault codes. The line on the map ran straight as if someone had plotted it with a ruler. That was the first reason he did not accept it as a software hiccup. Real roads did not allow perfect lines. Real driving produced imperfections. Real data had fingerprints. Andre sat on the edge of the bunk and rebuilt the night in his head. He remembered pulling into the lot. He remembered backing into a space near the edge so he could leave easily in the morning. He remembered setting the brake. He remembered the faint hiss of air systems settling. He remembered the silence afterward, broken only by distant idling and the occasional cough of another truck. He stepped outside to verify reality against the screen. The truck sat exactly as he had left it. The trailer angle was unchanged. The tires looked clean in the way tires looked after sitting all night. The ground beneath them showed no fresh compression, beyond the shallow impression already formed when he parked. The air around the wheels was cold. The rims did not radiate warmth. Andre knelt and pressed 2 fingers to the tread. Cold rubber. No residual heat. No grit freshly embedded. He walked the perimeter anyway. He checked the landing gear. He checked the kingpin area. He checked the glad hands. He checked the seal on the trailer doors. He found nothing that suggested the rig had moved at all. Back inside, he pulled up fuel telemetry. If the truck had driven the distance the ELD claimed, there would be a measurable burn, a change in tank level, even if small. The fuel numbers did not show it. The level remained effectively flat, consistent with idle or sleep mode. Fuel unchanged. From a telematics summary that should have resolved it into a simple category, a device error, a misread state, a ghost event created by bad signal, but the route itself refused to cooperate with that explanation. Andre exported the trip and sent it through a third-party mapping tool the company used for audits. The software overlaid the line onto road data and land parcels, then returned a note that made Andre's stomach tighten. The straight line crossed an area with no public road and no private permit lane listed in any database the tool recognized. It cut through dense timberland and a section of terrain that, on satellite view, showed only canopy and shadow. The ELD had not simply invented a drive. It had invented a drive through blank space, track through no road. From an audit mapping note, Andre ran the numbers again, trying to force it into a mundane failure. A coordinate swap, a corrupted location ping, a GPS jump that had been smoothed by firmware, but the line was too coherent, the speed profile was too stable, the start and stop points were too neatly anchored to known pavement. He checked his in-cab camera next, the small internal unit that recorded the forward view and the sleeper curtain. If the truck had moved, there should have been vibration, sway. The subtle pitch of the cab as suspension responded to turns. The camera showed none of it. The curtain remained still. The frame of the dashboard remained steady. The sound, when he turned it up, was just ambient lot noise and the faint electrical hum of the system. In the video's metadata, however, Andre noticed something that did not belong. For a short span during the logged drive segment, the camera timestamp drifted behind the ELD time by exactly 1 minute. It corrected itself later, returning to normal without error flags. Andre did not know what that meant. He only knew he had seen that kind of 1-minute discrepancy before in other case files, always attached to dead roads and repeating signals. He escalated the issue through his company's compliance chain. He sent screenshots, exports, and the mapping note. He asked for a physical inspection of the ELD unit, the antenna connections, the telematics module, anything that could explain it. The response returned as a closed loop of corporate caution. The event was categorized as device anomaly. The segment was marked non-actionable. The case was closed in the system to protect compliance from questions that could not be answered. Andre understood why the company wanted it buried. A truck that could drive without moving was not a story anyone wanted in an audit. So he kept his own file. He printed the route line on a paper map and circled the section where it crossed the blank patch of forest. He stapled the fuel summary behind it. He added the audit note. He made a copy of the internal camera footage and stored it on a drive that never left his possession. On the margin of the paper map, he wrote one sentence, not for a supervisor, not for an auditor, but for himself. The line was too straight for a human driver. From Andre Russo's handwritten note. After that, Andre started changing small things about how he slept. He began placing a strip of tape across the door seam so he could see if it had been disturbed. He began leaving a small object on the dashboard that would rattle if the cab vibrated. He began setting an alarm for a random time in the middle of the night, not to wake himself, but to interrupt whatever pattern might be using his stillness. Nothing else happened for several weeks. Then, on a night run under heavy fog, Andre checked his system before sleep and saw the ELD blink once, as if it had lost power for a fraction of a second. The screen returned immediately. The hours did not reset. No fault code appeared, but the blink was enough. Andre stayed awake until morning, engine off, listening to the lot and watching his mirrors, waiting to see if his truck would attempt to become a line again. He never reported that part. There was no field for it in any system. All I knew was the data wanted me somewhere I had never driven. From Andre Russo's later statement, archival transition. The seventh case returned to headlights, not from one vehicle but several, coordinated and silent, absent from highway camera records, as if the night itself had edited them out. Mason Hale pulled into the rest area because fatigue had started doing what it always did first, flattening the world. The white lines looked softer. The shoulder looked closer than it was. The lane reflectors stopped feeling like markers and started feeling like a pattern that could lull him into a mistake. He was a long-haul driver with enough years behind him to respect the quiet warning signs. He did not fight sleep on the interstate. He did not gamble with micro-sleeps. He took the rest area on purpose, the kind built with a long deceleration lane, a wide loop for heavy rigs, and a separate car section that usually stayed half empty at night. He chose a spot with clean sightlines. He backed in so his trailer doors faced the lot lights, not the tree line. He angled his mirrors down to cover the blind edges. He set the brake, logged off duty, and let the engine idle just long enough to stabilize the cab temperature before shutting it down. The rest area lighting worked. That mattered. Mason liked places where the light was honest. Within minutes, a car rolled into the truck side and stopped directly behind his trailer, headlights aimed straight at his rear doors. The beams were bright enough to throw hard rectangles of light onto the reflective tape. Mason assumed careless parking at first, someone who did not understand how trucks needed space to pull out. Then a second car arrived and stopped off to the right. Headlights angled to cut across Mason's mirrors and flood the cab through the small gaps in his window shades. Then a third. No doors opened. No silhouettes stepped out. No cigarette glow. No footfalls on gravel. The three engines idled with a low, even hum that blended together into a single mechanical presence. The headlights stayed fixed, as if mounted on tripods. Mason could not see the cars clearly beyond the glare. The light made the vehicles feel less like separate objects and more like a single mechanism using three sources. He adjusted his mirror angles again, trying to catch license plates in the mirror's edge, where glare sometimes softened. The plates were unreadable. Either they were absent or the light washed them into blankness. The dash camera recorded automatically, its small red indicator steady. When Mason later reviewed the footage, the frames showed the same problem his eyes had: shapes without identifiers, headlights, dark bodies behind the light, no usable plate detail, plates obscured. From dash camera review notes, Mason did not get out. He did not crack the door. He did not hit the air horn. He had learned that escalation sometimes fed whatever was testing him. Instead, he stayed inside, hands on the wheel, breathing shallowly while he watched for the smallest change that could tell him what these vehicles wanted. The cars held him in their beams, the way a spotlight held a stage. The first practical move he made was to check the lot layout. He craned to look past the edge of his curtains and confirmed what he already suspected. There was one entrance into the truck loop, a curved lane that cars had no reason to use unless they were trying to be near trucks. The rest area's car parking was farther forward, closer to the bathrooms and vending building, separated by a curb that most drivers treated as a boundary. Mason's phone had signal, weak but present. He opened his camera app and took a still photo through the windshield, hoping the sensor might catch plate reflection better than his eyes. The image captured only glare and the ghost of a hood line. He started a voice memo anyway, the way people did when they needed proof and had no better tool. "I am boxed by headlights behind my trailer. No one is exiting the vehicles." From a voice memo recorded in the cab minutes past, Mason tracked them by the clock without trusting the clock too much. He counted his breaths instead. The engines outside stayed steady. The beams did not shift. The cars did not creep forward. They were not searching for a gap. They were not waiting for a parking space. They were waiting for something else. That was when Mason noticed a detail that made the situation feel less like intimidation and more like procedure. The headlights did not flicker when engines idled. They did not brighten or dim. They held the same intensity, as if the vehicles were not running off alternators at all, or as if the alternators were being kept at a fixed state. He checked his mirrors again and saw a faint reflection in the corner of the left mirror, a suggestion of a driver's head in the first car. But the head did not move. It did not turn. It stayed centered behind the wheel like a mannequin. Mason called emergency services because the pattern had crossed the line into coordinated behavior, and because he could not safely exit with his rear blocked and his sight compromised by direct beams. He kept his voice low and controlled, the way drivers did when they feared sounding irrational. The call summary later reduced his urgency to plain language. Caller reports coordinated departure. From a 911 summary dispatch kept him on the line long enough to confirm the rest area name, his approximate mile marker, and that he was not injured. The operator asked if the vehicles had weapons or if anyone had approached his door. Mason reported no approach and no contact, only the lights and the refusal to show plates. While the operator spoke, Mason listened for footfalls outside his cab and heard none. He listened for car doors and heard none. He listened for the shift in engine tone that came before a vehicle moved. He heard nothing change. Then, without warning, all three cars left at the exact same moment, not staggered, not one followed by another. The engines rose in perfect overlap, a synchronized climb that sounded like one machine with three intakes. The headlights swung away in unison and swept across his trailer doors, then across the asphalt, then vanished down the exit lane, as if the cars had rehearsed it. Mason watched their taillights for as long as the curve allowed. The lights never wavered. The cars accelerated with the same timing and the same smoothness. They did not hesitate at the end of the lot. They did not stop at the yield. They left like they were being released. Mason stayed still. He did not start the engine. He did not chase. He kept the dispatcher on the line until the rest area returned to normal darkness, the kind that felt natural again. When a state trooper arrived, the lot was empty except for sleeping trucks and the vending building's pale glow. The trooper walked the perimeter, checked for tire marks, and asked Mason to point out exactly where the cars had been positioned. Mason indicated the space behind his trailer and the flanking angles. Under the lights, the asphalt showed nothing obvious. No oil drips, no fresh scuffs, no skid marks. The trooper asked if Mason could provide dash camera footage. Mason agreed and flagged the segment. He also handed over the still photo and the time of the event, as recorded by his phone and his ELD. The trooper's initial report treated it as suspicious activity with unknown vehicles, but the report included a note that made the case hard to classify. The vehicles could not be located anywhere else in the system. Mason's company requested a traffic camera query through the corridor's highway camera network, the same system used to confirm incidents and verify vehicle movement. The rest area had an approach camera near the off-ramp. and another camera farther down the highway that captured vehicles entering and exiting the corridor. The response returned with clean certainty. No entries on highway cams. From a traffic camera verification note, the cameras showed Mason's rig entering earlier that night. They showed other trucks. They showed ordinary cars using the off-ramp. But the 3 cars that boxed him with headlights did not appear on the approach footage at all. There were no matching timestamps, no silhouettes, no headlight pairs that corresponded to Mason's recorded moment. On the rest area's own camera, mounted near the vending building, the footage showed the lot lights working and Mason's trailer reflecting light. At the time the cars should have been present, the footage showed a faint bloom of brightness behind Mason's trailer, as if the sensor had been overexposed by headlights. But the vehicles themselves were not visible in any frame long enough to identify shape, make, or plate. In the file, that mismatch became the core problem. Mason had a witness account. He had dash camera footage of the glare. He had a 911 record. He had a corridor camera review that denied the vehicle's approach and exit. The evidence did not prove what the cars were. It proved something narrower and colder. The cars were present to the human eye and functionally absent to the systems designed to witness roads. Mason did not sleep after that. He drove out at first light and finished the run with the radio off. He kept checking his mirrors for the shape of coordinated headlights. He began changing his routines in small, practical ways. He avoided isolated rest areas. He parked near staffed truck stops instead of state facilities. He started backing into spots with a clear escape path, even if it meant walking farther to bathrooms. He began taking screenshots of his location at every stop, not because it helped him sleep, but because it gave him something to anchor the memory. Weeks later, he listened to the dash camera audio again and noticed a detail he had missed in the moment. Beneath the engine hum and the faint hiss of lot wind, there was a soft, rhythmic click, like a relay or a switch cycling at a fixed interval. It appeared just before the cars left, and it stopped at the instant their headlights swung away. Mason never claimed that the click caused anything. He only noted the timing and filed it with the rest. I could not see plates. I could not see faces. I could only feel the lights like pressure. From Mason Hale's written statement, archival transition. In the 8th incident, the road did not watch from headlights. It reached under the trailer, and the evidence was a physical object tied to an airline, positioned as if someone wanted gravity to do the rest. Terrence Vaughn treated pre-trip inspections the way some people treated prayer. He did them the same way every time, in the same order with the same patience, because the mountains did not care how experienced a driver was. The mountains only cared whether the equipment held. He ran a refrigerated trailer on long routes that crossed high elevation corridors. He had seen overheated brakes and runaway ramps, seen drivers white-faced after pulling down a grade too fast, and seen the kind of small failure that started as a minor oversight and ended as a news story. On a cold morning in late autumn, he pulled into a turnout above a long descent. The air up there had a clean bite, thin enough that every sound seemed sharper. Terrence set his brakes, walked the rig, and began his descent check with deliberate slowness. He checked tires and hubs for heat. He checked lights. He checked the glad hands and the lines. He checked the trailer's air system the way he always did, not because he expected sabotage, but because he respected what gravity could do. Then he crawled under the trailer and saw something that did not belong. A zip tie had been cinched around one of the airlines, not loosely, not as a temporary bundle, but tight enough to restrict the line's movement. It sat at a point where the hose flexed during articulation, a natural bend that needed room. The tie turned that bend into a choke point. It was clean plastic against dirty rubber, new enough to catch his flashlight beam. Terrence froze under the trailer and listened. No footsteps, no engines approaching. Only the soft tick of cooling metal and the distant wind combing through the trees. He backed out slowly and looked again, this time from a different angle. The placement was too specific to be accidental. It was not a leftover from maintenance. It was not the kind of tie a mechanic forgot, because a mechanic would not pick that spot. Foreign zip tie on airline. From a service protocol, Terrence did not cut it immediately. He did what disciplined drivers did when something felt wrong. He documented first. He took photos with his phone, close and wide, including the hose routing and the fitting points. He recorded the time and location in a notes app. He took a second set of photos with his company inspection app, because those uploads carried timestamps that could be audited later. Then he pulled up his pre-trip photo set from earlier that day. The routine images he took of critical components for compliance. The airline in those photos had been unobstructed, not present pre-trip. From a documented checklist note, that single detail changed the event from speculation to timeline. The tie had been added after his earlier inspection, which meant someone had been under his trailer while he was running, or more likely, while he slept. Terrence tried to reconstruct his last stop with the same methodical precision he used on the truck. He had parked at a large lot beside a fuel island in a corridor where rigs stacked up overnight. He remembered the back row because it was darker and quieter. He remembered choosing it because he wanted distance from the foot traffic near the doors. He also remembered a moment in the night when he woke without knowing why. No knock, no air horn, just a brief sense of pressure in the cab, the way the mind sometimes came up for air and then sank back into sleep. At the time, he blamed it on cold or a dream. Now it felt like a missing frame. He walked the perimeter of his rig again, this time looking for disturbances. The gravel under the trailer showed no obvious scuffs, but the ground was hard-packed in places, and damp in others, easy to read where it wanted to be read, and unhelpful everywhere else. He returned to the airline and finally cut the zip tie. The plastic snapped with a sharp, dry sound. He held the tie in his glove and felt a strange flash of relief that it was real, physical, simple, not a voice, not a signal, not something that could be dismissed as interference. He bagged it in a clear plastic evidence sleeve he used for damaged seals and disputed paperwork. He labeled it with date, time, and location. He photographed the tie next to a coin for scale. He photographed the airline again after removal. He called his company safety line and requested a service assessment at the next facility, not because he needed repairs, but because he needed a formal document that said what his instincts were already saying. The service shop met him 2 hours later. The mechanic lifted the trailer and inspected the routing. The evaluation was practical, focused on outcomes. The tie would have restricted movement over time. It could have abraded the line. Under sustained braking and vibration on a descent, a compromised airline could have become a pressure loss. A pressure loss on a grade could become delayed braking response. Delayed response could become panic. The mechanic's report used the closest language the system allowed. Sabotage likely. From a service assessment, Terrence left the shop with the report printed and signed, the zip tie sealed in a bag, and a new habit forming in his chest. He did not feel safer because he had avoided a failure. He felt targeted because someone had chosen a place where the stakes were predictable. He finished the descent later that day without incident. The brakes held. The air held. The rig behaved like a rig should behave. That fact did not comfort him. It only clarified what the tie had been meant to do. The goal was not necessarily to cause an immediate crash in a visible moment. The goal could have been to plant a fault that might present later under pressure, when the driver would blame himself. Terrence filed the zip tie as an artifact and requested the lot's security footage from his last stop. The lot provided a limited clip from the entrance camera, showing vehicles entering and exiting. The back row where he slept was out of frame. No one could be seen approaching the trailer because the night had not been watched where it mattered. In his own written note, Terrence listed one line that never appeared in the official paperwork. The tie looked like something that belonged to a mechanic, but it was placed like something that belonged to a hunter. "I did everything right and still found it there." From Terrence Vaughn's written statement, archival transition. In the final file, the threat did not hide under steel. It arrived on the shoulder like help, too fast to be real, and the moment it appeared, the road signal went dead as if someone had turned the world off. Hannah Pierce ran solo because she preferred control. She preferred her own schedule, her own pre-trip routine, her own silence. She kept her maintenance tight, her roadside membership current, and her emergency kit complete. She was the kind of driver who believed most problems could be handled if you stayed calm and followed procedure. Her engine warning light came on in the early hours of a winter night on a sparsely serviced stretch of highway. It was not a catastrophic alarm at first, more like a caution that something had drifted out of tolerance. Hannah did not ignore it. She signaled, eased to the shoulder, and stopped with her trailer straight and hazards flashing. She followed her own checklist. She logged her location. She sent a pin to a trusted contact. She opened her roadside app to request service. She had signal when she started. Within moments, the bars fell to zero. Not gradually, not with a struggle. The signal dropped like a switch had been thrown. Signal drops on arrival. From a phone log excerpt, Hannah tried again. No data, no outgoing call. She swapped to a different carrier line. No service. She toggled airplane mode, nothing changed. She opened her truck's radio and scanned. Only static. She sat still and listened to the idle and the wind, trying to decide whether this was an ordinary dead zone or something more deliberate. Her hazards reflected off the guardrail in slow pulses. The shoulder dirt looked undisturbed. The night felt empty. Then headlights appeared behind her. They came into view too quickly, as if the vehicle had been waiting just beyond the rise. The approach was smooth and confident, not searching. The vehicle slowed behind her trailer with practiced timing. When it pulled closer, Hannah's first thought was relief. Tow trucks sometimes staged nearby. Some operators worked corridors like predators, arriving before the official dispatch could. It was not ideal, but it happened. Then she saw the truck. It had no company branding on the doors, no reflective logo, no unit identifier, no phone number. The light bar on top looked generic, mounted cleanly, with none of the wear and grime she associated with real service rigs. Hannah lifted her phone and took a photo through her mirror, trying to catch anything that could anchor the vehicle to a real business. The image captured shape and light, but the doors were blank. Company not listed. From a business verification query, the tow truck driver exited and approached her cab. The posture looked professional at a distance. Close up, it did not match. The approach was too direct, too straight, too eager to get to her door. Tow operators usually pause to assess, to gesture, to communicate from a safe position. This person closed the gap as if permission was assumed. Hannah did not roll down her window. She did not open her door. She kept the cab locked and watched the figure's hands, looking for gloves, tools, a clipboard, anything that made sense. The figure leaned toward her window and made a gesture that could have been a request. Hannah could not hear any words through the glass. She could only see the insistence of the movement. She tried to call emergency services again because the situation had crossed into threat. Her phone found a thin thread of signal for a fraction of a moment, enough for a partial connection and a burst of data, then it died again. Threatening behavior. From a 911 call summary, the connection ended abruptly. The phone log showed a brief spike, then silence. No call duration long enough for a full report. No stable trace, only the fact that she had tried. The driver stepped out of Hannah's mirror view and toward the side of her truck. The figure moved with purpose, not curiosity. Hannah heard a soft, metallic sound, like a tool touching metal. Then she felt, through the steering wheel, a faint vibration. Her engine warning light blinked once and cleared. That detail should have comforted her. It did the opposite. It suggested the problem had never been the engine. It suggested the warning had been a prompt. Hannah sat in a locked cab on a dead road with no signal, hazards flashing into emptiness, while an unmarked tow truck lingered behind her trailer like an answer that arrived before the question could be asked. She opened her camera app again and began recording video, not because she believed it would save her, but because she needed a witness, even if it was only a file stored on a device. The video captured the hazard pulses and the wash of light. It captured the unmarked door panel. It captured the moment the tow truck's light bar flickered, not like electrical failure, but like acknowledgement. Then the phone froze and shut the recording down. The screen went black for several seconds and returned with the battery percentage unchanged, as if the interruption had not been power but access. Later, investigators would find the video file corrupted at the exact timestamp where the driver should have re-entered the frame. The next confirmed event came from a patrol unit that responded to a partial 911 ping in that corridor. The unit arrived to find Hannah's truck on the shoulder, hazards still blinking, cab doors closed, no visible damage, no tow truck present. The engine warning was cleared. The road was quiet. The shoulder dirt held no heavy tire impressions consistent with a tow rig, only Hannah's own tire pattern and the faint scuff of a single shoe near the passenger side, too shallow to measure clearly. Hannah was not in the cab. Her jacket was folded on the passenger seat. Her keys were in the ignition. Her phone was on the floorboard beneath the pedals, screen dark. The only usable artifacts were administrative, the kind that survived when everything else went missing. The phone log showed the instant her signal failed. The roadside membership app showed her request initiated and never sent. The dash camera showed her hazards and rear lights, but the frame held only glare where a vehicle should have been, as if the sensor refused to resolve it. When a follow-up query was made to verify towing companies operating in that corridor, none matched the time or location. No legitimate tow dispatch had been recorded in the area. No operator claimed the call. No invoice was filed. No service report existed. In the case file, that absence mattered as much as any testimony. What closed the file was not a confession or a capture. It was a pattern. A response time too fast to be normal. A vehicle that arrived like it had been waiting for the warning light to appear. And a signal drop that behaved not like poor coverage, but like an active shutdown. I saw the truck in my mirror and then my phone went dead, like someone flipped a breaker. From Hannah Pierce's last saved draft message, final archival note 9 stories, 9 routes, and the same underlying behavior across different forms. A voice that requested unit numbers without identifying itself. A station that demanded compliance without authorization. A sealed trailer that counted in impacts. A stop that printed proof on thermal paper and removed itself by daylight. A knock that arrived on schedule. A drive that existed only in logs. Vehicles that filled mirrors with light while evading highway cameras. A sabotage that left a cheap artifact where a mountain descent could have turned fatal. A tow truck that arrived too fast, unmarked, and erased signal as it did. The linking detail was not the fear. It was the procedure. Each event behaved like a system, learning how drivers comply, how they stop, how they answer, how they wait, and how they trust instruments. If this episode stayed with you, write in the comments which story hit you hardest. and whether you recognized any of these patterns from your own routes. Subscribe to Black Pine Archives if you want the next case file the moment it drops, because on some roads, silence is not the absence of signal, it is the signal.